Hello and welcome to the ultimate beginner guide for Legends of Runeterra. If you're looking for the fastest way to get new cards and decks, the best budget and beginner decks, and a tutorial on card mechanics, this is the perfect video for you. First of all, hey, I'm Snnuy. I've been playing and making content for this fantastic game for almost 3 years now. And in this video, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know to get through that phase where you're still collecting resources and figuring out what decks and champions you want to play. For the purpose of this video, I'll be Snooby with a fresh new account so I can pretend that I'm a noob that just started playing. Some of the stuff that we're gonna go over are the fastest way to get in-game resources, growing your collection and finding your playstyle, outside resources like where to find meta decks, tier lists, strongest cards, events and updates and all that, budget and beginner decks and how to slowly upgrade them as you get more cards, a few common mechanics and ways to play the game, and much more. To make sure this guide is accurate, I contacted a bunch of new players to ask for information they wish they had when they started playing. And like I said, I made a new account myself to make sure I don't get ahead of things. There will be timestamps below, so depending on how long you've been playing, you can skip to the chapter that's interesting for you. So let's get started. Once you have completed the tutorial, which effectively explains the fundamental aspects of Runeterra, such as attacking, blocking, and mana, you'll be able to start exploring. You also unlock access to the Path of Champions, which is a PvE game mode like Slay the Spire, a roguelike mode where you get more cards and power as you adventure on. Highly recommended for anyone to check out this fantastic mode with tons of progression and regular updates. You'll notice that you have obtained some decks and you unlock the PvP introduction reward track, which looks like this. I recommend taking your time and trying out some of the decks that the game gives you for free here. And so by defeating some AI opponents with those decks and progressing through the track, you'll ultimately gain access to PvP gameplay as well as the region roads. You will have unlocked these 7 decks, and later on in the video, there will be a segment where I show you how to upgrade these decks card by card. If you're watching this video before patch 4.5, the decks you got from the Prologue are different from the ones you see here. I reached out to the developers and they gave me the new deck info to be able to make this video. So that's why you might not be able to get them yet. If you already completed the reward track, you will still be able to get all these decks for free for a limited time after patch 4.5. And this is where the tutorial ends and Runeterra stops holding your hand. When you're at the main menu, you can click this paper icon to open up your quest tab. Any experience you collect by completing dailies and by just playing the game goes towards the region roads, which I'll go in depth on a little later. But that's not all. The same amount of experience goes into your weekly vault, and this is the real deal. As you play, this weekly vault levels up, increasing the amount of rewards you get until it unlocks every Thursday. The vault goes all the way to level 13, and you should get it to at least level 10 so you can get a champion wildcard. You remember those hype moments where you spent your entire paycheck on Hearthstone to open up 20 packs? Yeah, in Runeterra, you get that feeling every Thursday, for free. And you get to choose the legendary cards you unlock. Wildcards are the most valuable resource if you just started playing. They have different rarities and they let you choose any card of that rarity to craft instantly. Green for common cards, blue for rare, purple for epic, and orange for legendary, aka champion cards. So let's look at some of the resources you can acquire in the game, starting with these wildcards. If you unlock a random champion, that's great because maybe you really wanted that Gnar. But a wildcard lets you choose what champion you add to your collection. If you needed one more Aurelion Soul to complete that sweet dragon deck, an orange wildcard lets you do that. Next is Green Essence. This is also used to craft cards and to enter special game modes like Gauntlet that are more focused on competition. We're not gonna look at that right now, we just want to grow our collection. As a general rule of thumb though, when you're crafting new cards, always use your wild cards first. Once you run out of those, use your green essence. Wild cards are only used for one thing, crafting cards, and green essence can be used for multiple things. So that's why wild cards should be the first to go. And lastly, prismatic essence. This is used to upgrade your cards to foil and make them shiny. And yeah, this is an area where Runeterra is kind of lacking because these usually don't look great. And now let's look at the fastest way to get those resources. Daily quests are your bread and butter for getting experience in your weekly vault and towards your region roads. You can complete quests against AI and in the path of champions, so both are great options to get a little more comfortable with the game before you head into PvP, while still getting all that experience for more cards. So let's look at the region reward track. This is where you're going to be able to unlock a ton of cards. You only unlock cards from the region you choose, so if you're a Gangplank and Twisted Fate main in League of Legends, you're 100% sure that you only want to play build spotter, then just select this region, play it all the way until the end, and play your build spotter decks and be happy, because all the rewards are focused on build spotter. But that is far from the most optimal way to get cards fast. So what you want to do first, if you want to just grow your collection, is look at this green line. It's a little bit subtle, but on 9 of the 10 regions, you can see this green line, and that means bonus experience. So you go through the reward track faster. Region number 10, so the region that was added to the game last, is Battle City, and it does not have a green line. So I would recommend saving that for last, unless you really like Yordles. What you want to do is pick one of the region. We're going to show build spotter here. You're going to start all the way on the left because you have no experience, and then you want to get to the wild capsule, which is the 4th reward. After that, switch the region to another one with the green line and get this wild capsule, because the wild capsule just gives you those cards, those wild cards that let you craft anything you want. Once you've done that for all the 9 regions with that green line, you're gonna do the same thing, and you're gonna go from this wild capsule all the way to the champion capsule. And this is where you get the legendary, the champion cards. You do that for all the 9 regions again, and then you select the region where you're at, and you do the same thing. Go to that wild capsule for all the regions. Again, you go to the epic wild card, to the champion capsule. You get those cards, you craft whatever you want, because wild cards are broken. Keep doing that for all the regions until you grow your collection. And at that point, once you reach level 24, which should be here, I believe that is this wild capsule, 3,500 experience. At this point, the rate at which you acquire cards slows down enough that it's not really worthwhile min-maxing anymore. And you also have played the game enough at that point that you probably have a pretty good idea what decks you like and what decks you dislike. So select the region with some of your favorite decks and just go to the end for that region, or switch it up whenever you feel like, you know, these rewards are not worthwhile. But level 25, aka 3,500 experience, is kind of the end point. And of course, if you're eager, you can spend real money to get cards even faster too. But remember that Runeterra is extremely generous. Just completing your daily quests and getting 3 PvP wins every day levels your vault and region road super fast.
I hear it now, the thunderous applause.
Another way to get experience and learn about all the different mechanics in Legends of Runeterra is the challenges page. I want to highly recommend doing these challenges because it gives you access to archetypes you don't have the cards for, to see if you like the playstyle. Or if you run into a deck and you think to yourself, what the hell did I just lose to? You can simply head to the challenges tab, find the champion, and see for yourself. For example, this is the Celestial Invocation Challenge, teaching you the invoke mechanic. You play a unit that invokes, and it lets you choose a card from a powerful pool of cards that are only accessible through invoking. This is one of my personal favorite decks because nothing quite beats the feeling of destroying your opponent with a space dragon and his celestial army. There are like 50 different challenges, so you'll have your hands full here for a while. And most of these will introduce unique keywords, so before we move on, let's go over some of the most common ones. Keywords are these little icons on a card that give them a certain power. Challenger, for example, lets you choose what enemy unit needs to block your challenger unit, like landing a hook with Thresh. Quick attack is a keyword that lets units strike first when attacking. If the blocker dies before it can strike back, the attacking quick attack unit comes out of combat without taking damage. If the blocker survives, it strikes back. Next is Impact. When a card with Impact strikes while attacking, it deals 1 to the enemy nexus. This keyword can stack, so when you have 2 Impact, it deals 2 to the enemy nexus. Fearsome units can be blocked by units with 3 or more power. If you have a fearsome unit with less than 3 power, they are still scared of other fearsome units and cannot block them. If the power of an attacking unit with Overwhelm exceeds the defending unit's health, the excess damage goes to the enemy nexus. Normally, when a blocker is removed, the attacker receives and deals no damage. But when a unit with Overwhelm has its blocker removed, all the damages goes to the Nexus. And last, elusive units can only be blocked by other elusive units. Challengers can still force elusive units to block, and giving a unit elusive after it's already been blocked won't undo the block. Those are just some of the keywords in the game, but they are by far the most common ones. If you want to look at every keyword and interaction in the game, I'll have a handy link in the description to this article with all the information. For the next chapter, let's go over some common card game and Runeterra slang.
Hope lives in the edge of my blade.
The mulligan is the phase at the start of the game where a player can replace the initial cards they get. In Runeterra, you get 4 cards at the start of the game, and you can replace the cards you don't want to get different random cards from your deck. You can only do this once. Aggro decks, short for aggressive decks, attempt to reduce their opponent's life from 20 to 0 as quickly as possible. Rather than having a long-term game plan, these decks focus on converting their cards into damage. A control deck aims to control the opponent's cards and progression until they have full control of everything that is done during the game. These decks usually get their edge through card advantage, meaning they have more cards to play with than their opponent. Mid-range decks are somewhere between aggro and control in pace, seeking to win the game during the mid-game. They tend to control the board during the early game before moving into a more aggressive role mid-game with medium costing units and spells, with the goal of winning just before the late game. Combo is a deck archetype that tries to stall a game until they have a way to win with a small number of cards that, when combined, instantly or very quickly win the game. Calling something a 1, 2, or 3 drop refers to a unit that costs 1, 2, or 3 mana. Brick means drawing a hand with poor synergy. A bricked hand means you have no cards to play. Top deck refers to the card that has just been drawn, the card that came from the top of the deck. Burn means damage that goes directly to the opponent's life total. Burning cards refers to losing a card because your hand is full. Burning mana means losing unspent mana. The curve is the amount of cards you have dedicated to any mana cost in your deck. A perfect curve usually means playing a 1 mana unit on turn 1, a 2 mana unit on turn 2, and a 3 mana unit on turn 3. Face usually means a player's life total. The Nexus in Runeterra is referred to as the face. So going face means dealing damage to the opponent's life total. Another term used for hitting face is smorking. This is based on a meme, so I'd recommend just searching that on YouTube. It's pretty funny. Tier 0 describes a deck that is completely unmatched against all other decks in the game and is able to dominate the format. Value most simply refers to the ability to put down cards on the board and how much power those cards create to affect the board state. Buffing means increasing the stats of your cards by giving them attack, health, or additional keywords. In Runeterra, when a card says give +1/+1, that means it's only for this round. When a card says grant +1/+1, it's permanent. Triggering or proccing a card means activating its effect. Punishing a play means having a clear counter or answer for the card your opponent just played. RNG stands for random number generator and is a term used when a card has an effect with a random outcome, like a random card being generated. Tutor refers to a card that draws a specific card from your deck. In Runeterra, cards that tutor often look like boats, like Misfortune's ship draws misfortune, so we call them boats sometimes. Resources refer to the type of resources you have at your disposal in a game. Cards, mana, and life are the most common ones. A ping is a spell or skill that deals exactly 1 damage. Ramping means getting additional mana crystals. Ramping 1 mana crystal means having 1 extra mana to play with permanently until you reach 10 mana, which is the max. Hard removal means getting rid of a unit permanently, like Vengeance to kill a unit. Soft removal means temporarily getting rid of a unit, like Will of Ionia, which doesn't kill the unit but puts the unit back into the user's hand. Roping means taking a long time to end your turn. An OTK is a 1-turn kill, killing your opponent from full health in 1 action. What we just went over is general card game slang. Next, let's look at Runeterra specific slang. The stack is the place in the middle of the board where all spells and skills go before they resolve. An open attack is starting your turn by attacking the opponent. An open pass means pressing the pass button as your first action. Floating or banking mana means ending the turn with unspent mana. In Runeterra, that mana gets converted to a maximum of 3 spell mana. Pink region refers to Ionia. Their region icon is pink, and it's also a meme in the Runeterra community because the pink region is usually the region players find most frustrating to play against. Going wide refers to having a lot of units on the board. Going tall means having 1 unit with very high attack and health. Trading refers to unit combat where both units die. You trade your unit for your opponent's unit. Jump blocking means taking a losing trade where your unit dies and your opponent's unit lives, so you can protect your health total. Ghost blocking refers to putting a unit to block your opponent's unit and then removing your blocking unit. Flipping a champion means leveling them up. A combat trick is a spell that can be used during combat to win a trade, like giving your unit extra stats. And this isn't even close to the full list of slang, but when you watch a stream or YouTube video, these are the terms you'll hear most often. And next, let's look at ways to upgrade the beginner decks. These are the 7 decks you will have unlocked when you're done with the prologue. So I want to highlight 3 of these decks so you can decide which one fits your playstyle the most. So in this video, I'm only going to spotlight 3, but I will also have a link below to all upgraded versions of these decks. So we have Blades and Buccaneers on the left here, which is a very fast and aggressive deck, so that means it tries to kill the opponent very fast. Next up, we have a control deck with Veigar and Senna, Darkness and Drama, and a control deck is exactly what the name implies. It's a deck that tries to take control over the game by removing all of the opponent's units. And lastly, we have Fangs and Fury, which is a dragon deck with Aurelion Sol and Shyvana, and this is classified as a mid-range deck. And a mid-range deck means that this deck has a lot of early game efficient units to start taking control of the game, and then once this deck is ahead, it tries to close out the game with big powerful units. First up, we're going to look at Blades and Buccaneers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be removing cards one by one, and I'm going to replace them with better options as you grow your collection. So first of all, we're going to take out the Legion Drummer, and we're going to include a Jagged Butcher, which is a very powerful early game card, and we're going to add a Crackshot Corsair. The Jagged Butcher is a Plunder effect, and Plunder means this card is active once you've damaged the enemy nexus. Something this deck is very good at because it does play very aggressive and fast. Next up, we're going to take out the Arena Battlecaster because it plays more for having a wide board, and this deck can't always achieve that. So we're taking 2 of these out, and we're going to add 1 Legion Saboteur and 1 Elegant Edge. Next up, we're going to add even more early game units. We're going to take out the Parlays and the Brother Bond, and we're going to add the Crimson Pigeon. This is a epic card, but it is one of the best cards for aggressive decks. If you don't feel like you want to spend your epic cards on this, I would suggest adding as a replacement the Precious Pet. This is a good replacement until you have enough Green Essence wild cards to get that Crimson Pigeon. But this is just another 1-drop, but you really want that pigeon because, again, it turns into a really scary threat, which is just really good to have as a 1-drop. At any point, if you like playing this deck, make sure to add 1 more Misfortune, by the way. That is another card that is expensive, and you really need to make sure that this is the deck you want to play. But if you do, Misfortune is also one of the best cards in this deck. Next, we're going to take out the Hired Guns, and we're going to add 1 more Maker Rain and 1 Marai Warden. Now, we're going to go a bit faster because this is such an aggressive deck, which means that there is really no place for all these expensive units. So we're going to take out Riptide Rex, we're going to take out Captain Pharaon, we're going to take out 2 Angels, and we're going to take out both of the Reckless Trifarians. Lastly, we're taking out both copies of Might as well. And before we find 8 replacements for this, I'm going to suggest that if you have champion cards, you can look at Samira as a very good upgrade for this deck. You can immediately put in 3 copies of Samira, but until then, just play with the Darius. He is a good card. He is a good finisher. Samira is just a little bit better and efficient. Now, moving on. One of the most important cards to finish the game is the Noxian Fervor. This is a card you definitely want 3 copies of. And while we're at it, we can add 1 more Brazen Buccaneer, 1 more Iron Ballista, and we can take out the Pirouettes. Now, we have 5 deck slots left, and we do have 2 Dariuses. So usually you like having 3 copies of each card because usually there's always 1 best slot for the mana slot. So now we have 5 slots left, and a card that is very good here is the Eye of Nagakiboros. This is some card draw and a unit. Spawn means you get a 1/1 tentacle, so spawn 2 means you get a 2/2 tentacle. So we're going to add 3 copies of the Eye of Nagakiboros. And to finish it off, I would recommend 2 copies of the Imperial Demolitionist. This card is a little bit difficult to use because you're dealing 1 to your own unit, which means if the opponent kills that unit first, this effect doesn't go off. but you can ping your big Jack Butcher for 1 damage and then you deal 2 damage to the enemy nexus. So that is deck number 1, the aggressive deck. And we're gonna move up to Darkness and Drama. And this one, I will give a fair warning, is a little more of a closed archetype, meaning that this deck plays cards that will only be playable in this deck. If we look at the last deck, for example, Misfortune sees play in a deck that likes attacking a lot. It sees play in aggressive decks. With this, for example, one of the best cards, and if you want to play this deck, I would recommend crafting a Vhagar immediately. Vhagar is pretty much only playable with Darkness cards. So what this deck does is you have multiple cards that make this spell, the Darkness. It deals 2 to an enemy for 3 mana, which is not a great deal, but then you read Vhagar, and at the end of, or at the start of every round, he grants Darkness everywhere plus 1 damage. So every time you make a Darkness after that point, it will deal 3. Round later, it will deal 4. Another card that helps with this is the Twisted Catalyzer. When it strikes, Darkness deals extra damage. So you can see how specifically focused it is on that Darkness card. So this will only be good with cards that make Darkness, like the Solaris Sentinel. When I'm summoned, create a Darkness in hand. Senna. When I'm summoned or attack, create a Darkness in hand. We have the Ishtali Sentinel. When I'm summoned, create a Darkness in hand. So these cards only work if you're playing a Darkness deck, so be a little careful when you choose this deck. It is very fun, I definitely recommend it, but for growing your collection, it is less good than the previous deck because that deck has more generally usable cards. So with that disclaimer out of the way, like I said, the most important card in this deck is the Vhagar, so I would recommend crafting that as fast as possible if you want to play this deck, and then you can take out 2 Watcher of the Isles and 2 Grasp of the Undying. We're going to add 1 Pythos, which is a fantastic card in every single Bandle City deck, so definitely recommend that one. And then we're going to craft another card that is just one of the best Bandle City cards, and you will play this in pretty much every Bandle deck, Conchologist. Immediately add 3 copies of that. Slam Dunk, Pythos, and Conch are fantastic. Next up, we're going to remove the Burgeoning Sentinel. We're going to remove 2 Yordle Squires. We're going to remove the Carved Blade Twirler. Glimpse Beyond, also gone. And then now that we have 8 slots left, let's slowly start adding stuff. We're going to start with 1 Soul Harvest. We're going to type in Sentry. And we're going to add 3 Ceaseless Sentries. This is some nice card draw for the archetype, because control decks often win through card advantage, which means having more cards in your hand than the opponent. Next, we're going to add 1 more Stilted Rope Maker. This is a very important card as well, because it reduces the mana cost of Darkness everywhere by 1. So instead of them costing 3, they will cost 2. Another card we really need to add is the Ishtali Sentinel, another great game finisher for this control deck. After looking around a little bit and looking at some of the options, we are still running 3 copies of Glimpse Beyond, so I set to remove some of these, but you can add them back because this is still a very solid card draw. Okay, and now we are going to remove the Mirror Mage, which is just a little bit too expensive for this deck. We're going to remove the Buru Sentinel, and we're going to add 2 copies of Minimorph. This is another great removal card that instantly transforms a unit into a 3/3 unit with no text. Very good for a control deck. So what you're looking at right now is already a very, very solid deck. But Senna is the other champion, and she is pretty powerful, but she is not necessary. However, I would still recommend adding another copy to this deck and getting rid of 1 Solari Sentinel. And this is pretty much the entire refined archetype. The standout cards here are really Soul Harvest, Glimpse Beyond, Conch, kind of the Sentry, and Pythos. These cards that I just mentioned are playable in almost every Bandle City and Shadow Isle deck. So crafting these 5 cards, you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck, because every time you craft a Shadow Isle deck, you will probably play Glimpse and Soul Harvest, and every time you craft a Bandle City deck, you will probably consider Pythos, and you will definitely include Conchologist. Next, we're moving to my personal favorite, and that is Fangs and Fury, and this is a dragon deck. This deck plays early units that aren't dragons, but help you get your dragons that are very big and expensive, get them online earlier. For example, the Herald of the Dragons just reads, Dragon allies cost 1 less. We have a very expensive Aurelian Soul here for 10 mana, so we definitely want to get him out on the field as soon as possible to start winning the game for us. When Aurelian Soul levels, having your board at 20 or more power combined, he makes all your Celestial cards cost 0. And this is what I talked about during the challenges segment of this video. Those cards are, let me see really fast, I can click I believe over here, Celestials, yes. All of these cards are created through the Invoke pool, which is something Aurelion Soul does as well. Let's just say that they get very, very, very powerful, and Aurelion Soul will make them cost 0. So where you can play a 10 mana card for 0 mana, you pretty much win the game, which is exactly what Aurelion Soul should do as a 10 mana unit. You will mostly end up playing for the mid game, which is around turn 5, 6, 4, and 3 as well sometimes, and that is really when you reach your max power level with cards like the Screeching Dragon, Shyvana most of all, which made me realize the Fury keyword I haven't explained yet, but this simply means when this unit kills another unit, it gets +1/+1. So this deck is really all about striking and hitting stuff. You want specific allies to kill other specific enemy units. There are a lot of different ways to play this deck. It is not often a meta deck, but these are the changes that I think are necessary to make the deck playable. We're going to start by removing Confront, Chain Vest, and Guiding Touch. So first things first, Shyvana is the most powerful card in this deck, and the deck is more or less built around her. I would recommend using your champion card on her if you like playing this deck. Aurelion Soul is here as a 2 copy card instead of 3, just like all the other decks, and that is fine. You probably don't want more 10 mana units because it's not often you get to turn 10. So with that said, we're going to remove Disguise Descent. We're going to remove both copies of Chain Vest. We're going to remove Confront, and we're going to add 1 copy of the Dragon Guard Lieutenant. We're going to add a copy of Form Up. We're going to add a copy of Single Combat. Next, we're going to scroll down. We're going to remove both copy of the White Flame Protector. We're going to remove both copies of the Fused Firebrand, which might seem weird because these are dragons in a dragon deck, but you don't, like, let's say quality over quantity. That's what you're looking for with this deck. So we're going to focus on the important dragons and making sure that they get their chance to shine instead of just having a lot of dragons that might not do enough. Next, we're going to remove 1 copy of Kadragrin the Ruined. We're going to remove the copy of Kadragrin the Infernal, and we're going to remove both copies of the Dragon Guard Lookout. And we're going to add a copy of Dragon's Clutch. We're going to add 1 copy of the Targonian Tellstones. This is a card that lets you pick 1 of 3 options. This card actually recently got buffed, so the options you see here will be different. And an important inclusion is Hush, which silences a unit. If your dragon isn't big enough to beat one of your opponent units, just silence them, and they will be reduced to no keywords and no text. And all their buffs are gone as well. Next, we're going to type in Cosmic Youngling, and this is one of Targon's best cards. It simply heals you at every round start, which is great in a deck that wants to get to the late game to play your big Aurelion Soul. We're also going to add 3 copies of the Petricide Broodwing, and this is one of Demasia's best card, so you will absolutely not regret crafting this bad boy over here, or bad bird rather. We're also going to add 1 more copy of the Ruined Dragon Guard and 1 more copy of the Screeching Dragon, and we're going to remove the Wounded White Flame. And that is going to be the final deck. They're not perfect, but I'm working with cheap options. I'm trying to avoid epic cards so that you can start saving up for maybe the more meta decks, but I still want to make sure that as a beginner you can find one of these decks and make sure that you have something that you can get comfortable with. We had an aggressive deck, which plays fast, we had a mid-range deck that plays efficient, and we have a control deck that plays slow and removes all stuff until they have complete control, can just start finishing off the opponent. I myself am a mid-range player, so if you do look at some of the other videos on this channel, I upload gameplay daily, you're mostly going to find mid-range stuff with the occasional aggressive deck, and I am definitely not a control player, so I will recommend some other content creators in the description below as well for you to check out. And if those beginner decks still aren't to your taste, I have 3 more decks that will require a little bit more resources, but are great beginner decks. All of them are mid-range, and we're going to start with Kill Leona. This is a deck that I personally took to master a few seasons ago, and this deck is extremely simple. Leona is a card that has Daybreak, which means This effect activates if it's the first card you play in a turn. So this deck, all it needs you to do is just play units on curve. Turn 1, play a 1 mana unit. Turn 2, play a 2 mana unit. Turn 3, play a 3 mana unit. That's all it takes. Most of these units will have slight buffs like the Solari Soldier. If you play this, it will have +1/+1 this round. And Kill levels or gets more attack based on how many units with increased stats you have played. So Kill also becomes a win con. In the beginner decks, you already got 2 copies of Kill, so this should not be super hard to get. Leona and her Daybreak package are a bit more expensive. However, the Daybreak package is playable in many different other variations. So you finish the game by just playing units on curve, big stats. It's not too difficult, but I will also have some guides on my channel if you want to learn more about this deck. And next up, we have the Elites. And this deck is even more simple than the previous one. This deck has a lot of units with the elite keyword at the top here. This is a sub-tribe, so that means this deck cares about all units that have this text at the top of their card. Because we are running cards like the Battlesmith, which says when you summon an elite, grant a +1/+1. We have cards like the Trusty Ramhout. The first time you summon an elite, grant me +2/+2. So this becomes a 1 mana 3/3. We have the Vanguard Squire, which when you summon an elite, reduce my cost by 1. This will very often just be a 0 mana unit. So this deck is all about vomiting, honestly, units on the board, going as wide as possible, and then buffing up your board with game finishers like Champion Strength, which gives all allies +4/+4 this round. And if you have the attack token, which means if you're the one attacking, grant them Scout. And Scout lets you attack twice in a turn. If you have a unit with Scout, it means you can attack with that unit, it will do their attack, it will come back, and you will get another chance to do your regular attack. So the more units on the board you have, the more units you're going to give +4/+4, and the better your chances of finishing the game. Extremely powerful. I would definitely, this would be probably for beginners, it would be my #1 recommended deck. And lastly, we have Ash LeBlanc, which is a bit of a strange deck, and this one is also going to be pretty expensive, but this deck is really showcasing when mid-range decks can become really interesting, and as they start focusing on a effect, let's say, because this deck just plays big, good units while having synergy with Frostbite. Frostbite is simply, well, freezing an enemy and setting their attack to 0 for this turn. So you're attacking a lot with your big units. If they somehow manage to trade into, if your opponent somehow manages to trade into your big units, you simply freeze them. Oh, I'm attacking with my 5/6 and you have a 6/6, which means it will win the trade. Well, guess what? I'm just going to freeze you with a Harsh Winds card or with a Flash Freeze spell, and suddenly the unit does no damage at all. I understand that me sitting in front of a deck builder isn't going to help you understand these decks to the fullest. So I have a link to an unlisted video in the description where I go over these 3 decks with actual gameplay. One more important thing that I will have to mention is this button over here which says Standard and Eternal. The ranked game mode will mostly focus on Standard, which is a select pool of cards. Once a year, the Runeterra developers rotate a bunch of cards to Eternal, which means that these cards are removed from the Standard format and are only playable in the Eternal format. So if I click Eternal, for example, you're going to see we have cards like Draven, Katarina, we have cards like Rumble, Braum, Trundle, Vladimir. All of these cards have been rotated to the Eternal format, so they are only playable there. I would recommend focusing on Standard because this is mostly what the ranked format is all about. I have an entire video on what rotation means, the difference between Standard and Eternal. Going to have that in the link below as well. It might be a very hard concept to grasp as a new player, but I promise, just make sure that you look at Standard cards. This is really all that matters. And that's it for my beginner deck recommendations. I didn't give gameplay examples because this segment is purely to help you find and upgrade your playstyle, so you can hopefully start winning more matches with better decks. If you have any questions about the cards in these decks, make sure to leave a comment and I will answer your question as fast as I can.
First the smoke, then the fire, then the timbers!
If those beginner decks aren't exactly to your taste and you'd rather just craft all cards for the current tier 1 decks, then I got you covered too. The Runeterra meta is often extremely varied, with tier lists shifting almost daily and new decks being discovered all the time. So for that reason, it's pointless for me to tell you what's good right now, and instead I'm going to recommend a few of my favorite websites and resources so you can stay up to date with decks that top players are using, upcoming patches, tournaments, updates, and everything in between. At the top of this list, there is of course the official Runeterra website, where you'll find patch notes and the occasional dev article. Next up is the LOR report. If you play League of Legends, this is comparable to what Surrender at 20 used to be. When there's news or updates, the LOR report will be the first to cover it. They have a neat little calendar too, so you know exactly what events are coming up. A website that focuses more on just distributing ladder data and showing you what the best decks are is runeterra.ar. This is my go-to place for independent information on what the top players are using to climb, meta stats like highest win and play rates, and a handy little deck builder. If you're looking for competitive news and tournaments, mastering Runeterra is highly recommended. Instead of just pushing the data that's available, their team of top-rated players analyzes the statistics and gives you their recommendations. I also have a link below to the unofficial Runeterra rulebook in case you're ever confused about certain interactions, and I want to mention the Xbox Game Pass, which lets you unlock all cards from the Foundation set. And lastly, this isn't an outside resource, but the Runeterra event passes are a lot of bang for your buck. They cost 975 RP and you usually get at least 2 skins for champions, a ton of new cards, emotes, and Path to Champions resources.
Secrets hidden by frost.
We have now covered all relevant aspects for beginners in Legends of Runeterra. However, there are a few more topics that are not covered in the categories we previously discussed, but may still be important to know. Starting with spell cards. Runeterra has 4 different types of spells, or better yet, different speeds of spells: fast, slow, burst, and focus. There are 2 spells that can be used in combat and in response to the opponent playing a spell: fast and burst. Fast spells get put on the stack, which means the opponent gets an opportunity to react. Burst spells happen instantly and the opponent doesn't get a chance to react. Slow speed spells are put on the stack just like fast spells, so the opponent gets a chance to react, but they can't be cast during combat or in response to the opponent playing a spell. And focus, just like burst, happens instantly, but just like slow, can't be cast in response to the opponent. Focus and burst spells are generally weaker because they happen instantly. Fast is somewhere in the middle and slow spells are usually the most powerful because they are the riskiest to set up. Next is the stack order. When spells go on the stack, they always resolve from left to right. The same is true for combat and anything else in the game. Everything always goes left to right, except board clears, which happens simultaneously.
I guess you can win them all.
And that concludes this beginner guide. If you found this video helpful at all, please make sure to leave a like and comment so I know that I'm doing something right. Because this isn't the only video I have planned to help new players out. I'm working on 2 more videos, and one of them is a deck building guide that will go into the region strengths, and a guide that will cover more advanced mechanics in Legends of Runeterra to help you improve at the game. And as for this video, I will have a ton of links in the description about everything that I talked about in this video. And I'll keep the pinned comment updated in case any new information gets released that might impact the new player experience. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.